Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Luffy poisoned and awaken his Gear 5 spirit? Before I start, please do support for more awesome content, and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support and follow the Gungho WOlfwood for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story. Link in the description. Let's start this video. Luffy walked out onto the deck of the Going Merry, and raised his hand to his forehead to enable him to get a better look without the sun in his eyes. The ocean was calm and the sky was clear. It was still morning, but the sun already had some spite to it. Luffy raised his head to the crow's nest and spotted Usopp, who was already on watch. "Usopp!" Luffy shouted as he waved his arms, trying to get his attention. Usopp turned and looked down at Luffy, who looked as cheerful as ever. Luffy, what is it?" Usopp replied. "Any sign of land?" "I'm hungry," Luffy shouted up to him. Usopp signed and looked around again. "No, I've been watching for a few hours now," but I had Usopp's voice trailing off as he squinted at the horizon. Luffy blinked a few times before looking in the direction Usopp was. "Land!" Luffy shouted. Not long after, Nami walked out along with Sanji, Vivi, and Chopper to get a look. Sure enough, there was an island in the distance. Luffy cheered for another moment before rushing over to Zoro, who was busy sleeping in a hammock he had tied outside the previous day. "Hey, Zoro! We found land!" he shouted directly into Zoro's ear. Zoro's eyes snapped open and he glared at Luffy. "Couldn't you let me sleep a little longer?" he growled. Luffy let out a deep laugh. "Ha ha ha! But look! We're almost there." He grabbed Zoro's head and almost turned it 180 degrees to get a look at the island. "See?" he asked cheerfully. Zoro smacked Luffy's hand away. "Idiot! It's at least an hour away!" he shouted. Luffy burst out laughing as Zoro started to argue with him. The rest of the crew kept their eyes on the island. "I wonder what's on it," Chopper said to himself quietly. You stood on the edge of a large cliff overlooking the island's bay. He was certain that he saw a ship slowly approaching. He sneered and pulled his hands out of his pocket to discard his chewed-up toothpick. Upon throwing it away, he retrieved a new one from his shirt and inserted it into his mouth. You was a lanky-looking man with curly black hair. His bangs came down over his dark brown eyes, one of which was shielded by an eye patch. There was nothing wrong with his eye, but you felt that the eye patch added character. He turned and started to walk away, his bare feet kick up dust as he went. His hakama blew in the gentle breeze as he approached 3 cottages. He went into the largest one. This was a single-room cottage. The room contained a large table with chairs on each side, making it resemble a briefing room. At the very end of the table there was one large chair which currently had someone sitting in it. An average-height man with slicked back, red hair. He had a scar running over his and a long diamond earring on his left ear. He wore a white cloak with a very loose white shirt underneath. He also wore white pants as well as white shoes. In his hand he held a small coin which he continuously flicked in the air and caught. The side that always landed face up always started on the back of the coin. "Krull-sama," you began as he bowed his head in respect. "There is a ship approaching the island and the flag appears to be black." Krull held his coin still as he looked at you and smiled. "Ooh, a pirate ship? But what would bring them to my island?" He dropped his coin into his shirt pocket and then stood up, crossing his arms. You watched Krull's eyes and predicted that Krull's mind was starting to drift. Wouldn't you say that they must be completely mad to pay me a visit?" he asked you with a slight hint of excitement in his voice. You lifted his hand to his chin and sighed. "Krull-sama, it's not just your powers alone that make us what we are." He looked at Krull and smiled. "If anything, Captain, we could have gotten rid of you long ago." Krull snorted and flicked a few strands of hair back. "Of course you could, but we're a happy, loyal family. Aren't we, you?" You closed his eyes and nodded. "Of course we are." After a moment of silence, Krull walked over and put his arm on Yu's shoulder. "I trust that you will meet them at the shore?" he asked. You nodded slowly. "Of course, shall I bring someone?" Krull crossed his arms and lowered his hand. "Let's not scare them away just yet. Take Hattori with you, but make sure that he stays hidden unless they pose a threat." You smiled. "Of course they'd have trouble proceeding if Hattori uses his power." Kroll let out a low laugh and then let his hand slip off of Yu's shoulder. Now go get ready. We're going to have some guests. Kroll walked into the nearest cottage, which happened to be the barracks. Yu had already left with Hattori, so only 3 fellow crewmates were present unless Hattori was in mind for little games. Kroll surveyed the main room where his 3 mates were. Sitting at the table playing cards were Keiko and Juggernaut. Keiko was the only woman of Kroll's, a tall, menacing woman with long blue hair and very cunning. She wore a loose red nylon vest and black pants. She also wore long, black leather boots. Juggernaut, on the other hand, was a large brute. He was 7 feet tall and pure muscle. He had a large, orange mohawk and a dark, dreary face with a marble-sized earring through his eyebrow. All he wore was a green skin-tight outfit covered with studded straps with large, menacing studs. He too wore long, black boots. Kroll turned a chair around and sat down at the table with them. "We've got company," he told them with an increasingly large grin. Juggernaut slowly rose to feet and exhaled deeply. "How many?" he asked in his deep, strong voice. "I wouldn't mind taking them all on." Kroll chuckled and shook his head. No need for that. You and Hattori are going to meet them on the shore. If they turn out to be trouble, then we're all going to have a little fun." Keiko leaned back and put her long legs up onto the table. "Why did you send you and Hattori for such a simple task?" she asked coldly without even looking at Kroll. "Because we don't know anything about them yet," he replied as his eyes shifted towards Juggernaut. "I'm certain that you wouldn't have wanted to go down to the shore, especially if there was no fire to accompany the smoke." Juggernaut grimaced. "I would have gone." A voice came from under the table. It was undoubtedly Reza. Reza was a simple, gray wolf who accidentally ate the human fruit. Kroll sighed deeply and shook his head. "If they mean business, you'll all get your chance." As the Going Merry drew closer to the island, Luffy spotted a figure on the beach. "Hey, there's someone waiting to welcome us," he cheered. Zoro stepped in front of Luffy and squinted. They were still a couple 100 feet away, but Zoro was able to get a decent view of the stranger on the shore. "He's a strange-looking one," Zoro mumbled as he turned and headed to the anchor, getting ready to toss it into the water while Nami was getting the flag down. Sanji removed his cigarette, gave it a flick, and then put it back into his mouth. "He's wearing a hakama." "Cool!" Luffy exclaimed. "I want to meet him." "Luffy, no!" Usopp shouted as he jumped towards Luffy, but it was too late. "Gomu Gomu no rocket!" And Luffy was away. You watched as something came flying towards him at tremendous speed. It flew past his head, barely even missing him. In fact, it ruffled his hair. There was a loud crash, and he knew that whatever it was had just hit a palm tree. He turned around and raised an eyebrow. Struggling to stand up was a kid with a straw hat, red vest, and blue shorts. "And who are you?" he asked. "Monkey D. Luffy. I'm going to be the Pirate King," the stranger announced proudly. You felt his mouth drop as a wave of disbelief swept through him. "Pirate King? Do you know how impossible that is?" he asked. Luffy burst out laughing. "Ha ha ha, well, no matter what happens I will become the Pirate King, even if I die in the process." You stood staring at this strange kid. What he had just said was downright insane, but he certainly wasn't joking. "Hey, do you have anything to eat?" "I'm starved," Luffy asked. You turned to see the kid's ship approaching. It was small and odd-looking, but on it were some pretty interesting characters. "What the hell is this?" he asked himself. After a moment of inspecting the approaching ship and its crew, he spotted someone on board. Princess Vivi Nefertari of Alabasta. He turned towards Hattori, who he assumed had been standing beside him the entire time. "Get Vivi off that ship immediately. Kroll-sama would be very pleased with us," he whispered. "Will do." A whisper came from beside him. You smiled as he turned back to Luffy. "I'll give you something to munch on," he hollered as he delivered a swift kick to Luffy's jaw. "Luffy!" Nami screamed from the ship. Zoro clenched his fists and reached for a sword when all of a sudden Vivi screamed. Everyone turned to see her flying through the air towards the shore. You saw this and delivered a few more blows to Luffy's head before running into the woods. Vivi floated after him. Zoro and Sanji jumped overboard into the shallow water and swam onto the beach, where they hurried to Luffy, who was unconscious. "That bastard sure can kick," Zoro growled. Sanji stood up and discarded his cigarette. He's mine, he said as he reached for a new one. Laying on the cliff a couple 100 feet above the beach was Keiko. In her hand she held a small blowgun. Slowly, she slid a poisonous dart into it. As she got ready to blow, she felt the blowgun slowly pull itself out of her mouth. She looked up to see Krull hovering over her. Wouldn't you rather confront them and show them what you're really made of? He asked. Keiko, who had eaten the bullet fruit, smiled. They won't know what hit them. She giggled. Krull looked back towards the cottages where Juggernaut was practicing some techniques with his axes. Juggernaut, keep it up and there won't be any damn trees left on this island, he groaned to himself. Hattori stepped into the meeting room and threw Vivi onto the table. Hattori had consumed the invisibility fruit and used it whenever he could. Now, here he stood without his invisibility powers concealing him. Hattori resembled a rat. He had a sneaky, sly face and a small body. He had short brown hair and wore old, raggy clothes. Krull walked up to Vivi and touched her face. Don't worry, my dear, I'm not going to hurt you yet, but you are already as good as dead. Vivi, who was now tied up and gagged, tried to get away from Krull's touch, but it was not good. Slowly, the hand that Krull had laid on Vivi started to change. It was getting smaller, and the complexion was changing. Hattori snickered. Krull-sama, we have counted 6 of them, and they all seem to be fairly similar to us. Krull, who was now almost unrecognizable, nodded. Good, Juggernaut is getting restless. Who would you recommend he kill? Hattori paused, scratched his head, and then his eyes lit up. The swordsman. Krull brushed back his blue hair and snorted. Then have him killed. Keiko slowly walked down the village path, watching the villagers glare at her. She knew that she was unwelcome. She was a pirate, but not just any pirate. She was a Krull pirate. She had been a proud crew member for 10 years now. When she was only 10 years old, she had run away from home. She had run far, far away, and things eventually looked grim until a slightly older boy found her and took care of her. That boy was Krull, but back in those days he went by the name Hakim. His dream was to sail the seas, to breathe the salty ocean air each morning, and to watch the sunset over an orange sea. But had he intended on becoming a pirate? Keiko never knew, but she always stuck by his side. Deep down, she assumed that she loved him. Hide them! Hide them! Keiko shifted her gaze towards a small hut where a woman was rushing her children indoors. They happened to be carrying 2 large boxes, and it seemed that the mother didn't want Keiko to see them. She came to a stop and looked at the door. The mother had already gotten her children in and the door was locked, but she was becoming increasingly curious. As she took a step forward, there was a gunfire from inside. Keiko watched stunned as a bullet flew past her head. She was almost killed. After getting her head straightened out, she ran flat out towards the house and kicked the door as hard as she could. I happened to have a very weak door. The village was not very wealthy. In the middle of the room, the mother stood pointing the gun at Keiko in her shaking hands. Don't come any closer, she screamed. Keiko raised her arms. If you kill me, you'll be no better than I am. And with that, she took a step forward. Her eyes never left the mother's. When she reached her, she gently pulled the gun out of her hand and held it in her own. She slowly raised it to the woman's forehead and pulled the trigger. Blood splattered across Keiko's face as the woman collapsed dead. Her children screamed and ran out, crying their eyes out, leaving the boxes behind which had originally attracted Keiko. She slowly walked over and pulled one of the cardboard flaps up. Oh my God! She said to herself breathlessly. The box contained not 1 or 2 but 6 devil fruits. She quickly snatched them up and ran out of the home, down the path, and towards the ship. Krull picked up one of the devil fruits and poked his finger into it. These are the fruits that grant the one who consumes extraordinary powers, he asked. Juggernaut picked one up and smelled it. Should we eat them? Krull shrugged. Extraordinary powers or enough money to guarantee that we live well for the rest of our lives. You walked over and looked into the box at the fruits. If we all eat one, we could become the most fearsome pirate crew that the Grand Line has ever seen. Krull smiled fiendishly and raised the fruit he held to his face. And with a reputation like that, we could get whatever we wanted. We could be powerful and rich. His eyes moved from Keiko to you to Juggernaut, and finally to Hattori. Well, what are you waiting for? Eat them, he exclaimed. Each of them slowly took a bite of the fruit they held. And then another. And another until only one fruit was left in the box. You picked it up and looked at Krull's pet wolf, Reza. I have an idea, he said with a smile as he walked towards Reza. The wolf had a reputation for eating anything you offered it, and this was no exception. When Reza noticed that you had food, he quickly snatched it from him and ate it. The entire crew sat watching the wolf devour the devil fruit. All of a sudden, Hattori vanished. Everyone gasped in horror. Hattori, Keiko stammered. I'm still here, what's wrong? His voice came. You're invisible. Krull replied with an evil smile on his face. Am I? Wow, this could work out well for me, came the reply. Hattori had always been the crew's expert thief, and now that he could become invisible, there was nothing he couldn't get his hands on. Juggernaut's eyes lit up and he started to crackle. What's your problem, Oaf? Krull spat at him. I can feel it. It tickles. My muscles feel like they are tightening. Juggernaut giggled. Krull leaned across the table and looked at Juggernaut's arms, which seemed to be getting slightly bigger. Well, I'll be damned, as if you weren't strong enough, Krull said with a smile. I feel my power too, Keiko whispered. She reached across the table and grabbed a fork. She held it into her hand and watched it start to fold into a ball. Everyone watched with puzzled expressions. Keiko lifted her other hand and gave the fork a flick. She watched it take off across the room and bust through the wooden wall. Just like a bullet, she said with round eyes. How did you do that? Reza asked as he walked over in an upright position which had a strange human look to it. My wolf. It talked. Krull gasped as he looked Reza up and down. Hey, you understood me. Reza's eyes bulged out of his head as his mouth formed a perfect circle to match Krull's eyes and mouth. You, who was leaning against the wall, stood upright and spit out his toothpick. That's great, but what can I do? He muttered. Probably nothing, you've never been good for anything anyway. Juggernaut jokes. You leaped at this and pointed his finger at Juggernaut. Hey! Shut up, my skills are unmatched. Come over here and prove it, dirtbag. Juggernaut sneered. You growled and took a step forward. Within half a second he was across the room and on the other side of Juggernaut. What the hell? They both shouted while pointing at each other. Krull laughed and slapped you on the back. Hey, I'm tingling, he stuttered. Yu's eyes leaped out of the sockets even more, and he now pointed his other hand at Krull. Hey! You turned into me, he shouted. Krull looked at himself and burst out laughing again. We're a bunch of freaks. Keiko shook her head. Now come on, my abilities aren't as weird as yours. Krull laughed and put his hand on Keiko. He changed from you to Keiko now, and he started laughing again as he reached for his own S. Juggernaut also joined in laughing, as well as Hattori, who still could not be seen. Keiko ed and put her head back while listening to Krull complimenting her on her S. Krull stepped out of the ship and adjusted his white cloak. In front of him stood you, Hattori, Reza, and Keiko. Juggernaut stood beside Krull. I have come to a conclusion, he said to the four of them. It seemed that Juggernaut must have already been aware of what Krull had planned. Juggernaut, would you do the honors? Krull asked. Juggernaut smiled. With pleasure. Everyone watched as Juggernaut grabbed the ship with his two hands, lifted it over his head, and threw it into the ocean at least 200 feet out. You took a step forward. Hey, what's the idea? Krull turned to face them and smiled, flicking back some of his hair as he did so. This is our island now. The villagers will become our slaves. If any of them rebel, he trailed off and looked at you and Juggernaut. Kill them. Keiko put her hands on her. Well, what if someone comes to the island? Krull's smile widened. Then we kill them and all of their belongings become ours. You chuckled and discarded his toothpick. A pretty sound plan, but what if there are more devil fruits on the island? The villagers had 6. Krull nodded. That will be taken care of. We'll tear the island apart and make sure there aren't any more. He took a few steps forward and turned to Juggernaut. Fetch us a few of those houses if this is going to be our island. We're going to need a place to live. Vivi struggled against the restraint she wore, but it was no use. She looked up Krull, who now looked exactly like her. Krull bent down so close to Vivi that she could feel his breath on her face. My dear Vivi, long have I waited for some precious item as yourself, and now that you are ours, I expect that I can expect a hefty ransom for your release? Vivi was silent. The sound of her own voice talking to her was scaring her. It seems that you came to this island with pirates, is that right? I never would have thought that the Princess of Alabasta would travel with such notorious outlaws, but that doesn't matter. They'll be dead eventually, and if my men don't finish the job. He paused and looked directly into Vivi's eyes. Then I'll just have to get you to finish the job, he said as he put his hand to his face. But don't worry. They won't suffer too much, nor will your family when I make it to Alabasta, and neither will you when I have my way with you. In fact, Princess, I think that you will find it rather pleasurable. He gave her a little pat on the head and then walked over to Hattori, who stood at the door with his arms crossed. Krull paused when he reached him and turned his head slightly towards him. Keep an eye on her. If she gets out while I'm like this, then I'm going to have to do some rethinking, he said coldly. And with that he walked out. Hattori turned his gaze to Vivi and smiled. Don't worry about it, I'm here to keep you company, he said slyly as he picked up an apple and started peeling it into slices, popping each into his mouth. Vivi groaned as she looked up at the window at the clouds which drifted overhead lazily. Sanji and Zoro watched as Luffy struggled to stand up. You took some pretty hard hits, Zoro said flatly. There was more than one hit? Luffy groaned as he shuffled forward a few steps. Luffy, don't exert yourself. You should be laying down, Chopper yelled down to him. Luffy wobbled a little and then looked around at everyone. Where's Vivi? He asked quietly. Sanji clenched his fists. They made away with her. Luffy's eyes lit up with confusion, but a hint of anger was present, and it was growing. I only saw one. Did the other guy kick me too? Luffy hollered. Zoro put his hand to his forehead. There was someone or something that was invisible. It whatever captured Vivi and took off. Vivi is ours. They can't do this, Luffy growled, baring his teeth. Zoro kicked Luffy's feet out from under him and watched him fall. Baka, you need to settle down, listen to Chopper and go rest. I'll handle this. Sanji lowered his hand from his cigarette and glanced over at Zoro. I already claimed the kicker. Zoro nodded and looked at Luffy. This idiot needs to rest. He slowly bent down and picked Luffy up like a baby. Don't do anything crazy, Zoro, Nami shouted from the Going Merry, but it was too late. Luffy was in the air and headed straight for the ship. Luffy, watch out, Usopp yelled as he ran for cover. Luffy came crashing down with a loud thud onto the deck of the ship. Chopper immediately ran to his side and pulled some bandages out of his bag. Zoro turned to Sanji and nodded. Ready to find those bastards? Sanji blew out a stream of smoke and cracked his knuckles. As ready as I'll ever be. Nami and Usopp watched as the two of them disappeared into the woods. Think they'll be okay? Usopp asked. Nami smiled. Of course they will be, but she turned around to face Chopper. What about Luffy? Juggernaut, and you stood waiting at the top of the forest path silently. Birds chirped around them. Neither of them made a move as they saw two figures walking up the hill. I hope you're ready, big guy, you muttered. Juggernaut sneered. That green-haired freak will be a piece of cake. Sanji and Zoro continued to walk up the hill until they were no more than 20 feet from Juggernaut and you. There's 3 of them? Zoro growled. You waved his arm through the air and laughed. 3 of us? Ha ha, no, there are 6 of us. We are the Krull Pirates, and who might you be? We're the subordinates of a clown, Sanji said dryly as he tapped his cigarette. You let out a single, low laugh. I see the straw hat. I presume, well, as long as we are here, why don't we introduce ourselves? I am you, Krull-sama's first mate. My legs deliver the strongest kicks in the Grand Line. Juggernaut beat his fist against his and gripped one of his axes with his other arm. I am Juggernaut. No man can match my strength or technique. Sanji gave his cigarette another tap. I'm a just simple chef. Zoro sneered as he put on his bandana. You don't want to know who I am. Sanji dusted off his feet, while Zoro put one sword in his mouth and held the other 2 in his hands. Shall we get this show on the road? You asked the 2 while laughing. I've been waiting for you to say that, Sanji said as he flicked his cigarette to the ground. Juggernaut growled and leaped towards Zoro with his 2 axes, one in each hand. Isai smash! He bellowed as he drove his axes into the ground, sending a shockwave at Zoro which knocked him over. Yu ran towards Sanji and attempted to kick him in the head. Sanji jumped out of the way and the two quickly engaged in a speedy foot brawl. Zoro stood up and clenched his swords. Is that all? He grunted. Juggernaut spit on the ground and looked into Zoro's eyes. I haven't even begun to warm up yet, little man, he growled. Zoro leaped through the air and swiped at Juggernaut's leg. He managed to slice his leg, but Juggernaut howled and quickly slammed his axe down into Zoro's back, pinning him to the ground. Zoro let out a horrific cry of pain as blood started to seep through his shirt. Sanji quickly glanced over at Zoro, then back at Yu, but he was gone. Sanji furiously looked around. Where the hell did you go? Without warning, Yu's foot slammed into Sanji's neck, bending his head back with a sickening crack. Yu landed beside Sanji, who was now staggering, trying to regain his composure. What kind of dirty trick was that? He sputtered. A small trickle of blood began to pour out of his mouth. Yu smiled. It is my devil fruit ability. Super speed. I assure you, I don't fight dirty. I just exploit my opponent's weakness and strike when they are open. Sanji smiled and rubbed the blood from his lip onto his sleeve. When I'm through with you, being confined to a wheelchair will look like super speed. And with that he lunged at Yu again. Yu just stood smiling with his arms crossed. Sanji wasn't sure why until he felt a sudden yank behind him, and then he was flying in the other direction. He heard Juggernaut laugh maniacally until he crashed into a tree and blacked out. Juggernaut walked over to Yu with an enormous grin on his face. Piece of cake. Yu chuckled and slapped Juggernaut's arm. Krull underestimated us. Of course. Nobody can match our Juggernaut was cut off in mid-sentence, as his eyes grew wide and his mouth hung open. It didn't take long for him to fall over, narrowly missing Yu. Behind him, Zoro stood in a bloody mess with one sword in his mouth. His other 2 swords were located in Juggernaut's back. How? Yu stammered as he looked at the axe that Juggernaut had rammed into Zoro's back. He peered into Zoro's eyes, which now matched the color of his blood. He began to tremble. You're next. Zoro choked. Yu's eyes widened in horror. He quickly turned and ran back the way he had come. Zoro laughed, and then slowly collapsed. He looked up into the sky, which now looked completely red to him. You underestimated me, he gasped. Vivi exhaled deeply from her nose and looked around the room. There had to be a way for her to escape, but it seemed next to impossible for her to do so with Hattori watching her from the doorway. He seemed to notice that her eyes were watching him as he smiled at her. It was a sick, twisted little smile. 3 of Hattori's visible teeth were missing and the rest were discolored. He stretched and casually walked over to where Vivi was laying. Don't look so glum, he said suddenly, startling Vivi. I don't think that Krull will want to kill you anytime soon. He's always had a thing for girls like you. He sighed and sat down beside Vivi, who looked away towards the wall. You know, I didn't even want to be a pirate in the first place. Funny, huh? I was perfectly happy being a thief, but that all changed the day Krull caught me poking around his ship. His voice trailed off and he let out a little laugh. I can't really complain, though being a pirate has its plus side. For instance, I used to be a common thief. Now, how many people are honestly afraid of thieves? Not many. He looked at Vivi for a moment longer. She was still trying to avoid his gaze. But how many people fear pirates? Quite a few. He sighed and stood up, putting his hands in his pocket. This sure is a lovely island, though, he said quietly as he glanced out the window. Sanji slowly sat up and looked around. He quickly spotted Zoro laying on his back, but nobody else. Those bastards, how could they beat us? Sanji stammered. He slowly started to rise but felt a horrendous pain in his neck. What the hell? He cried as he fell back down, grasping his throat. He landed on his with a loud thud and just laid there waiting for the pain to die down again. Zoro, he tried to shout, but it came out hoarse and raspy. He grumbled and grabbed the nearest thing he could, a rock. Without hesitation he tossed it at Zoro and watched it bounce off his shoulder. On Zoro ed as he raised his head. He immediately spotted Sanji a couple dozen feet away. Where is he? He choked. A small stream of blood emerged from Zoro's mouth. Sanji struggled to sit up and face Zoro. "Where is who?" he replied as he reached for his lighter and a cigarette. Zoro started to look all around. "The big one, the one who had 2 axes. I stabbed him in the back, the other guy ran away like a stinking coward." Sanji's eyes drifted from his left to right. The 2 of them were alone. "Looks like you didn't get him as good as you thought." Zoro growled under his breath as he pulled his bandana off. "I stabbed the bastard with 2 of my swords. Did he make off with those 2? The 2 of them just sat there for a moment longer, enduring their pain in silence, when Vivi came walking down the path. "Vivi-chan!" Sanji exclaimed in surprise when he saw her. Zoro raised his head to spot her standing a few feet from where he was. "Hey, are you 2 alright?" she stuttered. Zoro chuckled. "I'll be fine, but Love's chef over there looks pretty beat up." Vivi blinked a few times and looked around towards Sanji. "Do you want me to help you up?" she asked. A hint of confusion was in her voice. Sanji smiled warmly. "Please do, Vivi-chan. You may lay your hands on me anytime you want." Vivi grimaced slightly but walked over to Sanji. "Okay, here goes." She reached down and put his arm around her shoulder and raised him to his feet. Zoro slowly managed to get to his feet as well. "We should get back to the ship, I hate to say it, but we may need Luffy." Sanji smiled. "I have no problem with that, unless he screws everything up." Zoro started to walk down the path, followed by Vivi and Sanji. Juggernaut held one of the swords that was used to stab him in the back. "This is a pretty impressive sword. How much do you think it's worth?" he asked you, who sat beside him at the table inside the barracks. You shrugged. "Who knows, we probably have to get an expert to examine it." Juggernaut tossed it over onto a stool in the corner of the room. "However expensive it is, it was no match for me." Juggernaut laughed. Not only did his devil fruit power grant him unnatural strength, but his muscles were also much stronger than that of the normal man's, and they also healed twice as quickly, maybe even quicker. Keiko walked in from the back room and looked at Juggernaut. "And you? You 2 are back already? You must not have had much trouble." You shook his head. "Quite the opposite. If I had stuck around, I may have been killed, and Juggernaut is still wounded from being stabbed through the back with 2 swords. Nobody was a clear winner." Keiko raised an eyebrow. "Evenly matched then?" She smiled and put her finger to her chin. "Well, I think that Krull is going to even the playing field very soon. Now that I look at what I have done, and what I still have not uploaded, as of this moment I have up to chapter 6 fully written. I'm not sure how long this fanfic is really going to be, but I'm aiming for 10 chapters, and it should end like every typical One Piece story arc, Luffy kicking some serious ass." Laughing face. "Anyway, here is the 5th chapter. So far it is my personal favorite, and I hope you enjoy it." Keiko walked out of the barracks and surveyed the ground for rocks. After finding a few decent-sized ones and putting them into her pocket, she smiled and walked off towards the trail that led down to the shore. Nami kneeled down beside Luffy and handed him a cold glass of water. Luffy quietly took it and drank it slowly. Chopper sat directly beside him, monitoring his condition. "I hope that Sanji and Zoro get back soon. With those 2 gone and Luffy all beat up, we can't fend off anything too great." Usopp laughed as he pumped his fist. "There's nothing to fear as long as the great Captain Usopp is here." Nami sighed deeply and sat down. "I wonder how Vivi is doing." "I'm fine," Vivi's voice replied. Everyone turned to see Zoro and Vivi with Sanji's arm around her neck. "What happened?" Nami asked, a bit shocked. "There's 6 of them, and they all have devil fruit powers," Zoro groaned. As Vivi helped Sanji down, Chopper came over to inspect him and Zoro. "Sanji looks okay, but Zoro, you have to rest," Chopper exclaimed. Zoro shook his head. "I've had wounds bigger than this." An image of Mihawk flashed through his mind, and then his struggle at Arlong Park. "I'll be fine," he said as he laid down against a wall. Luffy sat up into an upright position. "Let me know," he started. "Luffy, no," Nami said as she put her hand on his. "We should leave. We have no business here, and we're not going to gain anything if we stay." Vivi opened her mouth to object when Luffy interrupted her. "No, they've hurt and I can't let them get away with that." He slowly stood up and put his hat on, which he had been holding the entire time. Vivi walked over to Luffy and put her hand on his elbow. "What are you going to do?" she asked weakly. Kick their asses! Luffy shouted furiously as he ran to the front of the ship and leaped off. Everyone gasped and ran over to make sure he didn't fall into the water, but sure enough he was on the shore. I'm coming to kick your asses! Luffy yelled as he pointed at the woods. Oh really? A feminine reply came. Luffy stopped and blinked. He watched as a woman slowly walked out into the open. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Keiko of the Crow Pirates. Sanji's eyes lit up as he caught sight of Keiko. Can a woman of such beauty be evil? Nami ignored Sanji. Is she going to fight Luffy? Will Luffy even hurt a girl? Usopp stood watching with his slingshot in his hand. I'm Monkey D. Luffy. I'm going to become the Pirate King, Luffy said triumphantly, his gaze never leaving Keiko's face. Keiko smiled and pulled out a rock which she placed in her hand. That's fascinating, but my captain already is the Pirate King. Luffy scratched his hand. How is that possible? He mumbled. As Luffy started to go into deep thought over the trivial little thing Keiko said, she had already flicked a rock and it was coming Luffy's way. Luffy! Look out! Chopper shouted from the Going Merry. The rock collided with Luffy's leg, which made Luffy a little lopsided, but he stood back up and looked at Keiko furiously. Hey! What was that? It hurts. It was a rock and I have plenty more. Keiko smiled. Luffy growled. You're not going to hit me with any more rocks. Gomu Gomu no pistol. Keiko didn't know what to expect, so when Luffy's fist came flying at her, she was completely unprepared. Luffy's fist hit the pocket containing the rocks, ripping the fabric. All the rocks dropped onto the ground and Keiko almost lost her balance. What kind of attack was that? She stammered. Hee hee, I'm made of rubber. Luffy laughed. Keiko's shock was short-lived. Well, I don't need rocks, no. I have something far more effective for the likes of you. She giggled. She began to run towards Luffy, who could only respond with another attack. Gomu Gomu no bazooka. But Luffy wasn't fast enough. While she was running, Keiko turned herself into a bullet and threw herself in Luffy's direction at an incredible speed. She slammed into Luffy's, knocking the air out of him and knocking him down. Luffy! Nami screamed. Keiko grabbed Luffy by the arm, lifted him up, and launched him like a bullet. They all watched as she sent Luffy flying into the air at a 45-degree angle out to sea. Damn it! Sanji yelled as he ran towards the back of the ship and jumped off. Hurry, Sanji! Nami shouted after him. Keiko turned to the Going Merry and smiled devilishly. Anyone else? For a moment there was silence, but then Usopp took a step forward. Let's see what you've got. He shouted at her proudly, but his legs were shaking. Keiko yawned. And what can you possibly do? Usopp jumped down and pulled out his slingshot. He quickly launched a rotten egg directly onto Keiko's face. It happened so quickly that she didn't even notice. What is this? She screamed in panic as she grasped her face. I'm just getting started, Usopp told her. Tokusai Tabasuko Bashi. Usopp quickly launched his ball of Tabasco at Keiko and watched it fly into her mouth. Her reaction was almost instant. Ah! It burns! She cried as she fell over onto a couple dozen caltrops. She screamed in pain as she leaped back up. Usopp laughed as he ran towards her and pulled out a small hammer. Usopp hammer! The first blow hit her in the head, and she yelped in pain. Usopp hammer! What is this? Some kind of joke? Keiko cried, tears in her eyes. Everyone watched nervously, waiting for Sanji to resurface with Luffy. How long can Sanji hold his breath? Vivi asked in disbelief. I think we should be more worried about Luffy, Nami replied. After another minute Usopp started to quiver. Damn it! They're both dead, I know it. We don't have a captain anymore. Or a chef. What are we going? Whack. Usopp's mouth was silenced by the back of Nami's hand. They're right there, she said flatly as she pointed out to the sea. Sanji was slowly swimming in with Luffy barely above water. Damn, my neck is killing me, Sanji groaned. After another minute of swimming, Sanji threw Luffy onto the shore and then collapsed on his back and looked up at the sun. You're gonna be the death of me, He coughed as he looked over to Luffy, who was still unconscious. Chopper came hopping over. Luffy has taken too much of a beating. I don't want him to get up after he wakes up, he told Sanji with a tone of authority. Sanji sat up and looked down at the damp, droopy cigarette in his mouth. If he tries to get up, I'll lay him back down myself, he muttered as he threw the cigarette away. So, what about the blue-haired woman? Sanji asked. Chopper smiled. Usopp finished her off. His voice was still a bit surprised by it. Sanji's eyebrows rose. Usopp? Good, I wouldn't have wanted to take her out anyway. I have dibs on someone else. Chopper completely focused his attention on Sanji. What? You and Zoro came back in rough shape. I don't see how you could stand up to that guy. Sanji smiled. You is his name. I'll remember that for quite some time. Chopper sighed and looked from Sanji to Luffy and then back to Sanji. Would you help me get him back up to the ship? I want to get him in a hammock. Sure. Sanji slowly stood up and grabbed Luffy and threw him over his shoulder. You walked into the briefing room and hit Hattori's shoulder. Is she causing you any trouble? He asked as he motioned his head towards Vivi. Hattori shook his head. Nah, she's pretty cooperative and cute too. You crossed his arms and looked towards the gagged princess. She is indeed. I'm not sure that I want to be there when Krull kills the poor girl though. Hattori chuckled and sat down in a chair. Vivi wiggled herself into a sitting position and gave Hattori a menacing look. Geez, I don't know why she's pissed at me. Krull is the one who wanted to do this, Hattori muttered and then stuck his tongue out at Vivi. You sneered. Ha, there's something she can't do back to ya. They both shared a laugh over this one while Vivi helplessly watched them do so. After finishing his laugh, you walked over to Vivi and bent down so that he could be at eye level with her. He simply peered into her eyes for a minute before smiling. You look like a frail little thing, he whispered as he put his hand on Vivi's neck and started to slide it down. Vivi's eyes sparkled with embarrassment and anger once his hand made its way onto her. Without warning, her two legs, which were tied together, shot out and nailed him directly in the groin. Holy shit! You gasped as he fell over. His face turned blue. Hattori started to laugh but then stopped. He didn't know how to handle this. He watched as Yu's hand came up and grabbed the edge of the table. He then proceeded to raise himself to his feet. Although he was standing in a very awkward position. Don't get too close to that little witch, he gasped as he limped towards the door. Gee, get that for me, he said as he clutched himself in pain. Hattori opened the door and watched you shuffle out. He closed the door and turned back to Vivi. Kind of serves him right for touching ya, huh? He snorted. Hattori walked over and looked out the window and sighed. I hate being cooped in here watching you, Princess Vivi, no offense, but it's boring. As he continued to talk and look out the window, he didn't notice that Vivi was slowly raising her tied feet towards his head. I'm sure that I won't have to for much longer though, he said as he turned around. Bang! Down he went. Vivi slid off the table and hopped towards the door. When she reached it, she turned around and slowly turned the doorknob with her hands until it opened. She started to hop out when one of the ropes binding her got caught on a nail that was sticking out from the door frame. Her eyes glistened as she started to run the nail through the rope repeatedly. Juggernaut looked up from the table as the door opened. I walked Vivi. Hey, how'd you get? He stopped and looked at the expression on her face. It was cold and heartless, just like Krull. Who are you? He asked, puzzled. Who do you think I am? Vivi stammered. Juggernaut blinked. Krull-sama? Vivi smiled fiendishly. Of course. Do you think that the princess is possibly able to escape with her mouth gagged and her limbs tied together? Juggernaut laughed. I suppose not. But I didn't expect you to be back so soon. Vivi winked. Not back for long, sorry. I just came back to speak with you. Juggernaut turned and looked back at the door that led to the bedrooms. Ayu isn't in very good condition right now. The princess kind of kicked him somewhere that really hurts. Vivi's eyes widened. Oh ouch. She almost got me there earlier too. That little witch. She crossed her arms and sighed. Well, I'm going back down to the ship now, back to those idiots. Juggernaut gave Vivi a thumbs up. Good luck, Captain. Vivi turned and walked out without responding. She quickly closed the door and leaned against the side of the cottage. Wow, she said as she breathed a sigh of relief. That ogre must be dumber than he looks. I thought that he would have asked me to at least change forms or something. After a moment she caught her breath and proceeded to leave Crow's camp. Don't worry guys, I'm coming, she said, smiling as she moved on. Vivi quietly walked down the peaceful forest path, eager to get back to the ship. This forest is so beautiful, I can't believe it harbors such evil though, she thought to herself as she took small, careful steps over sticks and leaves. She continued to worry that maybe Juggernaut would realize who she really was and would come after her, or maybe even Hattori. Stop thinking that, it's silly, she told herself harshly. Just then, she heard a ruffle in the bushes. She paused and looked in the direction it had come from. Hello? She asked quietly. She was starting to feel nervous. Slowly, she started to walk towards the bushes where she heard the sound. Is anyone there? She called out to the bushes. This is ridiculous. It was probably just a bird, she thought to herself. When she reached the bushes, she reached down with one hand and started to pull the push towards her. All of a sudden, someone or something leaped out of the bushes. Vivi jumped back startled and then realized that it was just a kid. Oh, you scared me, she said as she breathed a sigh of relief. Shut up. Stupid pirate. Leave me alone. The kid screamed as he turned and ran away down the path. Vivi blinked a few times. What was that about? Is there a town on this island? After gathering her senses, Vivi set out again, but this time she wasn't aiming to go to the ship. Hattori slowly opened his eyes and yawned. Oh, where am I? He asked, puzzled. After a moment of just laying there, his eyes widened and he jumped up. A quick survey of the room told him what he hoped wasn't true, but it was. The princess is gone, he cried with wide eyes. He ran outside without haste and threw the barracks door open. Juggernaut was playing cards with Reza. Juggernaut looked up at Hattori and grunted. What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be keeping an eye on the princess? Hattori felt the sweat on his forehead spill out in waterfalls. As she's gone, he stammered as he looked at the faces of Juggernaut and Reza. Gone? What if she goes back to the ship? Captain Crow will be in danger, Reza cried out. We have to find her. We have to. It's Hattori's mess, so he must fix it. A voice came from the back of the room. Everyone turned to see you looking a lot better. You, Hattori began. You managed to let her escape, Hattori, so it's up to you to do something about this before all hell breaks loose. You told him coldly. Hattori managed a half nod. Oh, okay, I'll just go after her or something. Do it quickly, you instructed. Hattori mumbled something as he fiddled with the doorknob. The door slowly opened and Hattori slid out. How could he let a tied-up girl escape? Juggernaut growled. You didn't answer. Hattori slowly walked down the path with his machete in his hand. Come on out, princess, I gotta take you back, he groaned. In his head flashed the very moment Vivi had knocked him unconscious. He had turned around only to see her feet right there waiting for him, and then they came at him. The rest was blank. That sneaky little, he grumbled as he continued down the path. He continued to walk for another 10 minutes or so when he stopped to look around. He was at the shore and right in front of him was the ship he didn't want to see. How the hell did I manage to end up here without noticing? He cried. A few faces appeared on top right after he said this. Who the hell are you? Zoro asked with a dark expression on his face. Hattori felt his heart miss a beat. Where is Vivi? I have come to capture her again. Vivi appeared up top and looked down at Hattori. You! How dare you escape from me? He growled as he pointed at her. Vivi's eyes darkened and she did not reply. She appeared to be fairly angry about something. Without a word, she turned and walked away. Are you the one who turned invisible? Nami asked. Hattori heard this and instantly stood high and proud. Yes, that was me. Nami sighed. You don't seem very threatening to me or very cunning. Shut up. I am a master thief. Master thief. He spat at her. A look of pure delight spread across her face. A thief, huh? Hattori crossed his arms. That's right, what's it to you? Sanji smiled. No matter how good of a thief you think you are, you cannot be better than Nami-san. His eyes suddenly lit up into massive hearts. She's so clever. Hattori snorted. She doesn't even look like she could steal pie from a window. Nami's eyes widened. I used to do that when I was a kid. She turned to Sanji with a small smile on her face. Sanji-kun. Sanji looked from Nami to Hattori, and then back to Nami. There was clearly some tension in the air. It took him a moment to realize what Nami wanted. Oh. Right away, Nami-san, he said in a sly voice, but his eyes were in love. He twirled away to the other end of the ship singing anything for Nami-san. Once he returned, he handed Nami's trademark weapon to her. Hattori raised an eyebrow. What's this? Nami closed her eyes and smiled. Answer me, damn it! Hattori shouted. Nami opened her eyes, turned, and jumped off the ship onto the shore, landing on both feet. Your stay with us has expired, she said with a smile. Hattori blinked and shook his head. What? Are you going to fight me? A little girl like you. Come on now, this isn't funny. Nami laughed and leaped into the air and directly at Hattori. She's gonna come down on me in the head with that pole, Hattori thought as he prepared himself, but he was dead wrong. Nami used her staff to launch herself directly at him. Her leg dug in with a subtle thud, but the expression on Hattori's face was anything but subtle. He tumbled over and got back up. Very funny, he growled at her. He slowly started advancing on Nami, who held her staff diagonally with 2 hands. He was waiting for her to make the first strike, and sure enough, she did. His staff swiped at his neck, but he quickly ducked and slashed at her arm. He watched as his knife ripped her shirt and sliced through her shoulder like a slab of meat. Ah! Nami cried in pain as she fell down. Honestly, what were you expecting to accomplish with a weapon like that? Hattori laughed as he kicked her, which rolled her over. Sanji stood witnessing this with a fiercely pissed-off expression. You bastard! He shouted as he bent down and leaped off of the Going Merry. He moved so quickly that Hattori couldn't do a thing about it. Next thing he knew, Sanji planted his foot directly into his face. How? A kick to the ribs. Dare. A kick to the neck. You. A roundhouse. Hurt. A punch across the side of the face. Nami-san. And a drop kick right to the top of his. Hattori went flying back and landed on the rocky part of the shore, his head hitting a rock. Ouch, he groaned as he slowly crawled to his feet. You bastard, she said. Blood flew from his mouth. Nami had also risen and stood behind Sanji with one fist clenched. Hattori slowly worked his way into a run with his machete in the air. Die! He cried as he ran towards Sanji. Nami swiftly moved out from behind him and delivered him the hardest punch he had ever received. Right across the face. He froze instantly and then collapsed. Are you alright, Nami-san? Sanji asked as he started to reach for Nami's shoulders, but then remembered that one of her shoulders was cut open. I'm fine, she said quietly as she managed a weak smile, and then she collapsed. Sanji lifted her and got her back onto the ship. Chopper! Sanji shouted. Chopper, who had been watching over Luffy and Zoro, already knew about Nami's injury. I know. Don't worry, I'll take care of her, he said as Sanji set her down beside Luffy. That was too much, Sanji exclaimed as he turned to face the island. They're not going to hurt anyone else, and I'm going to make sure of that, he shouted. He took a few quick strides forward when Zoro's arm shot out in front of him. We both have a job to finish. You're not going alone, he said with a smile. Sanji furiously lit a cigarette and popped it into his mouth. Then let's go. Let's finish the damn job. Crow walked into the cabin while Nami and Hattori were busy arguing. I wouldn't be surprised if they start fighting, he murmured as he sat down on the couch. Hattori had shown up saying that he was going to take Vivi back. That idiot let her escape, he snarled. He leaned back and thought this over. But if she did escape, she would have naturally left before Hattori, so if he is here and she isn't, she must have gone somewhere else. His voice trailed off as he flicked some hair back. Across the room was a mirror on the wall. He caught a glimpse of himself sitting there with his leg crossed, a puzzled expression on his face. Damn, even I'm having trouble remembering that I'm a pirate, he chuckled. He stared at his reflection for another minute, and then sighed. No, I don't think that I'll be able to bring myself to kill Vivi. Anything for Nami-san. Sanji's voice came from outside. It proceeded to the back of the ship. What a strange crew this is. Krull sighed as he decided to lay down. On the ceiling, Krull spotted a spider moving towards a fly stuck in its web. I'm just like that spider. I have them all right where I want them. He stopped and bit his lip. Then why haven't I killed them yet? He thought to himself. He cleared his mind and watched the spider for a few more minutes. He watched it move it and kill the fly. He watched it cover it in its silky webbing, and he watched the spider go back to its hiding spot in the corner. Ah! A cry of pain came outside. It was Nami. Krull exhaled deeply and stood back up. Then a face flashed through his head. Without hesitation, he hurried downstairs to where Keiko was tied up. Upon entering the room she was being held in, she looked at him. Krull? Yeah, it's still me, he replied as he pulled up a chair and sat beside her. How's it going? He asked. A subtle hint of sympathy was in his voice. These ropes itch so much, she said as she sighed. Krull smiled slightly and reached for Keiko's hand. He found it and wrapped it around his own slender hand. Don't worry, soon everything will be okay. Keiko frowned. These guys are strong though. Krull seemed to hear this but didn't seem to fully take it in. When you are free and everything is over, we will get a boat and set out to sea. Just you and me. There was a faint sparkle in his eyes that made Keiko curious. What are you talking about? What about the others? Don't worry about them. As long as they have you, they will be fine. He paused for a moment, and then slid his chair a little closer. I want to tell you something. Will you listen and tell me if I'm crazy? He asked. Sure, Captain, she replied. I'm not sure that I want to be a pirate anymore. There have been many close calls and many bad days. Way more than any normal person would experience, and I thought back to the days when we were young. You know, when we were teenagers. His voice trailed off as he looked into Keiko's eyes. When they were younger, the two of them were very, very close. I'd like to go back to an easy life like that with you, Keiko, he continued. He wrapped her other hand around his and looked into her eyes again. Just you and me on the ocean, watching the sunset. We could let the sea take us wherever it wanted. He smiled at her. Keiko smiled back. I'd like that. Slowly, Krull brought him closer to Keiko's. She knew that who she was looking at wasn't Vivi, it was Krull, and that was all that mattered. Chopper slid a pillow under Nami's head and put a warm, moist cloth on her head. Her shoulder was bandaged up now, and she had regained consciousness. I don't feel a thing. She groaned as she turned her head to look at her shoulder. I gave you sedatives. You won't feel anything for a few hours. Chopper told her as he shifted through his bag. Sanji really stuck up for you there, Chopper said. Nami smiled weakly. Yes, I would often say to myself that he is like a little boy, or even a dog. He'll do whatever he wants you to do, and I used to exploit that. She paused for a moment. But now I know just how much he cares about me. She turned her head to the other side and saw Luffy snoring. Luffy also cares deeply about me, she thought to herself. Usopp sat by looking worried, and Chopper was still tending to Nami. They all care about me so much, she thought to herself as she felt a tear. Chopper noticed this and his voice sounded nervous. What's wrong? Does it still hurt? He asked. Nami shook her head. A smile crept onto her face. No, Chopper, it feels great, and so do I. The tear ran down her cheek as she closed her eyes to rest. That's what Luffy is always talking about, Nakama. They will fight for you until the bitter end, even if it kills them. And they will always be by your side. Luffy's eyes snapped open. I'm drowning! He screamed as he jumped up and started running around, flailing his arms. Sanji saved you! Usopp yelled. Luffy continued to run around for another moment until what Usopp said finally sunk in. He slowed down to a stop and looked down at Nami. Oh, is Nami okay? He asked. Chopper nodded. Her shoulder won't heal for at least a week, but she'll be fine. Don't worry about who did it to her, Nami and Sanji took care of him, Usopp told him. Luffy sat back down and watched Nami in silence. Get better, Nami, he said to her. He felt confident that she could still hear him, and that saying what he could would help her recover. Nami was strong anyway. Of course she'd recover. Crow walked out onto the deck and immediately spotted Nami wounded. Is she going to be okay? He asked. Yeah, her shoulder is going to heal up no problem, Chopper replied. Luffy jumped down off the bow and walked over. Ah, Vivi! You're back. Crow smiled. Yes, I am. I'm glad to be back too. He looked around for a moment, noticing that not everyone was present. Where did Sanji and Zoro go? He asked. Usopp, who was looking over the side of the ship, turned around to face Crow. They went after the guys who beat the crap out of them before. Sanji is looking good, but Zoro, his voice trailed off. Luffy laughed. Zoro is strong. He'll kick ass. Chopper looked up at Luffy. I hope you're right. His back is in terrible shape. Sanji continued to walk up the path with Zoro to his side. I can't wait to kick that bastard's ass, Sanji said. An image of you flashed through his head. Zoro laughed. Hey, the big guy isn't going to get any less than that. Sanji then paused and flicked his cigarette. I'd like to see the captain, though. He must be a coward, making his men do all the work like this. He lowered his arm and continued walking with Zoro. To their left, Vivi was walking down a path towards a small village, but she didn't see them and they didn't see her. All three of them were too busy with their thoughts. In Jagaimo village, Ceres was slowly tending to her garden when she noticed someone walking towards the village that she didn't recognize. Oh no, they're here already! She cried as she ran out of her garden and across the street. She stopped in front of a house and furiously beat on the door. It opened rather quickly and a large, middle-aged man stood in the doorway. Ceres, you look positively spooked, he said. There's someone coming. I think it is one of Krill's pirates. She lifted her hand and pointed down the road at Vivi, who was walking along minding her own business. Please, do something, Mayor Gillis, Ceres shouted. Gillis stepped out of his house and into the middle of the road. By this time, a few people were looking out of their houses as a result of Ceres shouting. When Vivi was close enough, Gillis raised his hand and held it out in front of him. Hey, you guys collected the last shipment 2 days ago. Why are you here already? He asked her. Are you up to no good? Because if you are, we will fight you to the end no matter what. Vivi blinked. Her mouth dropped and for a second she didn't know what to say. What? Shipment? I don't know what you mean, she said quietly. That's right. We haven't had enough time. It's only been 2 days. Vivi took a step back. I think you have me confused for someone else. Gillis tightened his fists. Are you not from the Crow Pirates? Vivi's eyes widened and raised both arms. And no. I just escaped from them. I am Princess Vivi Nefertari of Alabasta. I'm traveling with some of friends who are escorting me back home. Gillis lowered his arms. Friends? Why did you hesitate? Vivi bit her lip. They're pirates. Gillis' eyes flashed. Pirates? Why would a princess be traveling with such outlaws? You must surely be out of your mind. Vivi quickly shook her head. No, they're not what you think. They are all good people. You wouldn't even know that they are pirates. Gillis stood where he was quietly, looking at Vivi. I didn't even know that there was a village here until a boy ran from me on the path. She paused and looked around. Do they Crow pirates come here? Gillis nodded. They come here to take our produce every week. They take more than they need, leaving us with very little to eat or drink. And if we can't meet their quota, they kill one of the villagers. Vivi gasped. That's horrible. Gillis nodded. They've been doing it for a few years now, and it is becoming increasingly difficult for us to survive. Vivi felt a small tear trying to escape from her eye. You don't deserve to live like this. Gillis dropped his head and looked at the ground. Have you ever stood up to them? She asked. Gillis nodded slowly. We're no match for them, though. They all have devil fruit powers while we have nothing. Vivi noticed a few tears in Gillis' eyes. Are you okay? She asked, stretching an arm towards him but pulling it back. They got their powers here. He paused and looked at Vivi. They stole them from us, and they killed my wife in order to get them. Gillis instantly turned away from Vivi. She knew why. We tried to find more devil fruits on the island afterwards, but we couldn't. There was a long pause before he started to speak again. It was about a year ago when we tried to stand up to them. It was the first and last time that we did so. Vivi's heart sank. What happened? They were too much, even for our entire village. 20 people were killed, and afterwards they killed 10 more just because we stuck up to them. Vivi gasped and raised her hand to her mouth. That's barbaric, she whispered. Gillis slowly turned around. His face was tear-stained. We in Jagaimo village practically become laborers to them, or even slaves. Vivi felt her hatred for the Krull pirates rising. Don't worry, I know who can help you. Juggernaut slowly lumbered over to the woods and pulled out his axes. Time to sharpen my babies, he cooed. Mind if I help? Juggernaut turned to see Zoro and Sanji. What? How are you alive? He asked as he raised his arm at Zoro. I'm more resilient than you could imagine, Zoro replied with a smile. And twice as stubborn, Sanji jokes. Juggernaut took a step forward and laughed. I guess you didn't learn your lesson last time. This time I'll finish you off for good. Sanji looked at Zoro. Have fun with the ox, I have to take care of someone else. He motioned towards the cottages to the right. Zoro smiled as he put his bandana on and drew his sword. Go ahead. I'll be fine here anyway. Juggernaut snickered as he pulled out his 2 giant axes. They'd been waiting for you, he sneered. Zoro smiled. Heh! What a coincidence, I've been waiting for them. Then let's get the reunion started. Juggernaut howled as he charged forward. Zoro's eyes widened as the giant ox picked up speed. Zoro had to leap out of the way to avoid being run over. Ise Nise! Juggernaut shouted as he twirled one axe directly at Zoro. Zoro leaped up in its path, grabbed his sword, and hit the giant blade, knocking it off course. He watched it spin out of control and hit a tree. Juggernaut charged at him again for round 2. Come on, big fella, Zoro growled. Ise Nise Toriandu! Juggernaut howled as he started to spin his axe around wildly. Zoro started to feel a slight breeze, and then the next thing he knew, Juggernaut had created a miniature tornado, and Zoro had been swept up in it. Baka has to fight from a distance, Zoro roared as he flipped out of the tornado just before it launched him into a thick tree branch. My wound is starting to tingle, but I should be able to take care of this bastard before it gets any worse, Zoro thought to himself as he began his descent to the ground. Once he was within range, he lunged out at Juggernaut's head and delivered a very hard punch, but it seemed to have no effect. After landing and getting up, Juggernaut smiled at him. Do you really think that you can hurt me with your fists? I ate the fruit of strength. Nothing can hurt me. Zoro chuckled. I think I've already disproved that last time we met. Zoro leaped into the air and lashed out at Juggernaut's neck, but the brute jumped back too quickly. His leg quickly came up and kicked Zoro's hand, which held his sword. Zoro cried out as he started to fall, but Juggernaut caught him in his massive hands and began choking him. You overestimate yourself too much, he said as he tightened his grip. Zoro's back started to become tense, and his face tightened. Juggernaut raised an eyebrow. What's going on with you? All of a sudden, Zoro threw Juggernaut's arms off him, and the brute fell over onto his back. How did you do that? He bellowed. Zoro stood back up. His back was once again a bloody mess. Meditation, he replied with a blank stare. I completely focused on the pain in my back, giving me the strength I needed to get your stovepipes off my neck. Juggernaut stood back up and narrowed his eyes. Stovepipes? Zoro smiled as Juggernaut's anger grew. Within seconds, the ogre was running again. That's right, come on, Zoro thought to himself. Once Juggernaut was within range. Sure, son. A large gaping wound appeared on his, and Juggernaut's eyes rolled back into his head. Down he went, this time for good. Zoro slid his sword back into its sheath and closed his eyes. He then cried out in pain and collapsed onto one knee. You walked out of the barracks after hearing some loud noises. He turned to see Zoro fighting Juggernaut 100 feet away or so, but something else caught his attention. Back for more, are you? You asked as Sanji walked up to him. We didn't have a fair fight. The ox over there interrupted us. But this time, there will be nobody to save your sorry ass. Sanji spat. You chuckled. Aha, I see, so you're serious about this. Sanji exhaled a plume of smoke and narrowed his eyes. I've been waiting for this moment since I set foot on this island. You took another step out and closed the door behind him. Alright then, we'll see what you've got in you. Sanji adjusted the jacket and cracked his knuckles. Don't hold back. I don't plan on it, you replied as he got into a fighting stance. Sanji took the initiative and somersaulted over you. Before landing, he swiped at you with his leg, but you moved out of the way using his devil fruit ability. Once Sanji stood up, he looked all around but couldn't see you anywhere. Damn it, don't fight like a coward. Show yourself, Sanji shouted. I'm up here. As soon as Sanji looked up, you came down and punched Sanji in the face several times before landing. Arg. You ass! Sanji growled as he threw his cigarette away and leaped at you. They both grabbed each other and rolled down the side of the hill towards the cliff. They stopped a few feet away from the edge and looked at each other. You're pathetic, having to rely on a devil fruit to win you your fights. Sanji growled as he let go of Yu's arm and brought his elbow down on his jaw. He leaped back up and immediately sent his foot out, knowing that you would stand back up, which he did, and Sanji's foot connected with his, almost sending him off the cliff. Sanji then spun around and shot his leg out at a tremendous speed. Mutan shoot! His foot slammed into you and sent him flying off the cliff and over the ocean. Sanji didn't even bother to see how far out he sent you. Vivi, would you moisten the cloth on Nami's forehead? Chopper asked as he put his instruments into his back and buckled it up. Sure, Crow replied as he gently lifted the cloth off of Nami's head and went to the side of the ship with it. He slowly lowered a bucket attached to a rope down and got some water. After bringing it back up, he moistened it and neatly set it back on Nami's head. Thank you, Vivi, Nami said quietly. You're welcome, Crow replied with a smile as he stood back up. Usopp turned his head towards the bow of the ship and looked at the shore. Is that a wolf? He asked. Chopper jumped up on the railing as Krull headed back inside the ship and made his way downstairs. Yeah, I think it is, Chopper replied. The two of them walked to the bow of the ship and looked over. Hey, wolf! Usopp shouted. Luffy, who was napping, jumped up. Wolf! Where? He ran over and caught sight of the wolf on shore. Cool! He shouted in admiration. Shut up! I am no ordinary wolf. It said, I am Reza of the Crow Pirates. I ate the human fruit and I assume that you did too, little dear, Reza said as he glared at Chopper. Yeah, but Chopper trailed off and looked at Reza again. What do you want? Reza quickly turned into his upright form. I'm here to cause trouble. Luffy laughed while Chopper and Usopp exchanged confused glances. No, Chopper whispered. He then turned back to face Reza. You're not going to have any trouble here. I won't let you. Let's find out if you can. Reza snarled as he leaped up onto the ship, breaking off part of the railing. Chopper pulled out a rumble ball and devoured it. He quickly turned into his arm point form and socked Reza in the thigh. Reza brought his heavy forearms down upon Chopper's head and knocked him down. Chopper immediately got back up and leaped at Reza. Kokut across. A large X flashed across Reza as Chopper pounded him with his hooves and wrists. He stumbled backwards while Chopper came around for round 2. Kokuti Rosio. His left hoover slammed into Reza's upper and knocked him overboard. Chopper waited for Reza to get back up. He had a feeling that the wolf wasn't finished yet, but Chopper planned on knocking him out of commission the very moment he climbed back up. Krull sat down beside Keiko and sighed. What's wrong? She asked. Krull shook his head. I'm feeling pretty mixed up inside and I don't know why, he replied as he looked at his slender hands. Keiko. Yes? Let's get out of here. Krull quickly untied Keiko's ropes and helped her up. Are you able to walk? She nodded. I'll be okay. Together, they walked up the stairs and out of the cabin. Immediately, Chopper, Luffy, and Usopp all turned to Krull and Keiko. Vivi, why did you untie her? Usopp asked. Just ignore them, Krull whispered. Together, the two of them walked past the three of them. Luffy ran up to Krull before he could get off the ship and grabbed his shoulder. Vivi! Hang on, what are you doing? Krull turned around and flicked his hair back. I guess this charade has gone on long enough, he said, and he then changed back to himself. I am not Vivi, I am Captain Krull. Luffy's hand dropped, as did his mouth, and so did Chopper's and Usopp's. Finally, Luffy spoke up. Cool. You can change shape. Luffy, he's our enemy. Chopper shouted. He's their leader. Luffy blinked. You are. You're the one who caused Nami to get hurt. And I almost drowned because of you, and where's Vivi? With each passing word, Luffy's anger grew more and more. Krull took a step back, holding Keiko by the arm. She escaped. She's probably fine. It's a wonder that she didn't come back here, really. Krull turned back around and leaped onto the shore with Keiko. If you follow us, you will regret it, he said without even stopping or turning his head. Luffy started to move forward when Usopp grabbed his arm. Luffy, don't worry about it. They'll run into Sanji and Zoro anyway. Luffy groaned and watched them leave. I'm not going to go after him yet, I want to find Vivi. He slid Usopp's hand off and jumped down, heading for the woods. Vivi sat at Gillis' kitchen table sipping tea. He was sitting across from her. I wish that I could have put in more tea, but we may not even meet the quota this time around, he said quietly. Vivi reached across the table with her free hand and placed it on Gillis. Don't worry about it, Luffy will take care of everything, she said with a sincere smile. Gillis smiled in return and drank some more tea. It would be nice to be free again, free from those damn pirates. Each and every one of them deserves a spot in hell, especially Krull. Vivi nodded. I didn't get to actually speak with Krull, he had me tied up and I didn't even see him for long. But the things he said to me were terrible things. I can't imagine how he can live with himself. Her voice trailed off. Krull is a very fearsome man. Gillis paused to take another sip of tea. I used to think that some of his subordinates were the most terrifying of the gang, but after seeing Krull fight, it completely changed my mind. How does he fight? Vivi asked. Gillis sighed. He is completely dependent on his devil fruit ability. Not only can he transform, but if he ever touches you, he'll have access to more than just your appearance, memories, fighting style, friends and foes, personality. He'll have it all at his disposal, so if he touches you and then transforms into you at any time, he can be very, very difficult to subdue. Especially if he touches someone who is strong-minded or has big muscles. Vivi raised her eyebrows. Sounds pretty bad. Zoro walked into the barracks and spotted his swords. As he grabbed them, Sanji walked in. These guys are too full of themselves. He chuckled. Zoro stated all of his swords and then smiled. I felt without these. Sanji stepped outside and looked over his shoulder. Ready to head back? He asked as he pulled out a fresh cigarette. Yeah, I'm ready. Krull and Keiko continued to walk through the woods slowly, at their own pace. What are we going to do from here? She asked. Krull exhaled. I have no idea. What happens, happens. Let's just see what fate will dish out for us. They walked for another few minutes when they spotted two people up ahead. That's two of them, Keiko informed Krull. Krull pulled his cloak off and gave it to Keiko. Put that on and wear the hood. Fasten it well, they would recognize you but not me. As they approached, Sanji looked over at them. Who are you two? He asked. Krull held his hand out and smiled warmly. I'm Janai from Jagaimo village. This is my wife, Chiko. Pleased to meet you. His smile grew when Sanji shook his hand. He let go and held his hand out to Zoro. Pleased to meet you, sir. Zoro hesitated for a moment, but ended up shaking hands with Krull. Sanji bent down to get a look at Keiko's face. Hey there, he said with a grin. Keiko lowered her head more without saying a word. Krull noticed this and turned to Sanji. Sorry, I must apologize, she's very shy around strangers, but we all are here on this island. I suppose we're so isolated. He stopped and looked around. Well, it was nice meeting you, but we gotta go, he said to Sanji. He nodded to both of them and continued walking with Keiko. That was awfully close, she whispered. Don't worry, you did good, he assured her. The two of them continued to walk up the path towards the cottages. Thanks for watching this video. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow the Gungho WOlfwood for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.